Hello and most welcome to the continuation of 1320A. I will continue with the article of Witherspoon, Logic and Attunement. And in this one enters the Australian philosopher Graham Priest. And the question to be asked: is P and not P true? Suspense. And I'll continue with the book. Just put the finger on the screen where I am.
To make it sharper.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Please.
And it's running.
Yes, please.
Priest on revising logic. Whatever else Heidegger's challenge to logic might be, it certainly appears to involve challenging and even rejecting the principle of non-contradiction. We may formulate this as the principle that the conjunction of a statement and its negation, P and not P, is necessarily false. For anyone curious about the status of the principle of non-contradiction, Graham Priest is an essential philosopher. As I noted above, he defends dialethism, the metaphysical position that for some propositions P, the conjunction P and not P is actually true. Within classical logics as formal systems, accepting a contradiction as true has the consequence that every proposition is true. To avoid this consequence, Priest advances a para-consistent logic as formal system. In a para-consistent system, it is not the case that P and not P entails Q. For any randomly chosen proposition Q. priest advocates dialethism not only as a logic as metaphysical system, but also as a framework for reading Heidegger. He argues that Heidegger's investigation of being may be advanced by placing it within dialethism. Doing so would allow a Heideggerian to maintain both that being is not an entity, and thereby respecting the ontological difference. And that being is an entity, thereby ensuring that we can make assertions about it. Finally, Priest's work is valuable in that he reflects explicitly on how formal systems can be revised. And lays out criteria that should govern the selection of logic as formal system. The nature and basis of such revisions will turn out to be a crucial issue for our understanding of Heidegger's project. In revising logic, Priest distinguishes several notions of logic. Expounding dimensions of the concept different from those captured in the Heideggerian distinctions. I have just explored. These notions are, in his nomenclature, one, logica utens, how people actually reason. 2. Logica docens. Logic as it is formalized and taught. And 3. Logica ens, or the set of all truths regarding what follows from what. Priest's concept of logica docens is close to what I have labeled logic as a formal system. And so I will focus on his account of how it can be revised. Priest characterizes logica docens as an attempt to give a theory of the validity of ordinary arguments. What follows from what? Coming up with an adequate formal system is like coming up with a theory in any domain. Researchers aim to match theory to data in such a way as to best satisfy theoretical virtues like simplicity, non-ad hocness, unifying power, fruitfulness. In the case of logic, the data are those particular inferences that strike us as correct or incorrect. Stated thus boldly, this position smacks of psychologism. That is the view that the aim of logics as formal systems is to formally characterize the inferences we are psychologically inclined to make. This is in opposition to the idea that logical systems aim to capture rules of truth. The inferences that are actually valid, not the inferences we happen to think are valid. Priest, however, is no friend of psychologism. He makes clear that the inferences to which we should try to match our theory are the inferences that, upon reflection, we regard as correct. And in determining what inferences are correct, we appeal to the norms of our inferential practice, including, perhaps, the very formal system that we are trying to fit to the data. This appeal may seem to involve a vicious circularity. But it does not. The correction of our actual inferences by reference to a former rule is like the way theory informs data in the empirical sciences. On this picture, as we gather more data or examine our data more closely, we may change our theory. For example, Priest argues that logicians like Frege and Russell attended more closely to mathematical inferences than their predecessors had. And developed formal mathematical logical systems which they adopted in preference to Aristotelian syllogistic. It is not just an addition to or a correction of it. Even though it involves rejecting the previous logic as formal system, and so is illogical in that sense. This revision is still rational in a broader sense, in that it is justified according to the canons of rational theory choice. Priest's case for rejecting the principle that contradictions are necessarily false exemplifies this general account of the revision of logic. Priest offers many arguments for dialectism and paraconsistent logical systems. A representative one begins with the Russell paradox. Generated by defining the set R of all sets that are not members of themselves. If R is a member of itself, then it is not a member of itself. On the other hand, if R is not a member of itself, then by definition of R, it is a member of itself. Letting P be the proposition that R is a member of itself, we can conjoin these conditionals to get the biconditional P if and only if not P. This biconditional implies the conjunction P and not P. Hence, it is true both that R is a member of itself and that R is not a member of itself. Responses to this paradox are legion. But apart from the scant handful of dialethists, they all start from the position that the contradiction must be avoided. So they all look for flaws in the argument that leads to it. Priest surveys these attempts and argues that none is rationally acceptable. He thinks each one rests on one another arbitrary assumption. It is more reasonable to adopt a paraconsistent logic as formal system that tolerates true contradictions. This will better model our inferential practices. This revision allows us to adopt a dialectic logic as metaphysical system that asserts as true the conclusion that R both is and is not a member of itself. Priest's case implicitly relies on the kinds of considerations governing theory choice that he formulates explicitly in revising logic. For example, the arbitrariness of other resolutions of the paradox counts against them. while the fact that dialetheism's solution to one paradox suggests similar solutions to others counts in its favor. It is worth noting that this account of a rational change of one's logic as formal system does not make an appeal to logika ens. The third of the three concepts of logic that Priest identifies. Given the definition of logika ens as the set of all truths about what really follows from what, this is surprising. One would think that in constructing a formal system, a logician should aim to capture the inferences that actually are correct. Rather than merely the inferences that people judged to be correct. To make sense of this situation, we can appeal again to the analogy Priest draws between logical theorizing and theorizing in the empirical sciences. Logika ens occupies the place of, for example, the actual movements of physical bodies like the earth and sun. In constructing theories of dynamics, we aim ultimately to provide formal models of movements of these bodies. but that to which we match these theories is not the celestial bodies themselves, but the data we have about their movement. In similar fashion, one could say that the inferences that, upon reflection, we recognize as correct are the data about logika ens, that we attempt to match when we construct a logika docens. Thus for priest, even though we do not actively consult logika ens, it remains the ultimate goal in constructing a logic as formal system. And this goal is a set of timeless truths. All the truths about what actually follows from what. By positing this domain of logical truths, priest is, I suspect, trying to assure us that, undergirding the assessment of theoretical pluses and minuses, that is the business of logic as discipline of formalization. There lies an ultimate ground or authority to which that theorizing is answerable. Priest versus Heidegger. Priest's account of how one might come to reject one formal system and embrace another is rationalist. Despite the fact that the formal system he embraces is one that violates what most philosophers would consider a core tenet of rationality. He defends it by offering arguments that are meant to be intelligible to traditional logicians. A reader of Heidegger might therefore hope that Priest's work could provide a model for understanding Heidegger's own questioning. Of the principles of classical logics as formal systems. Perhaps his philosophizing about being should be seen as rationally defensible according to broader canons of rationality. I will ultimately offer a kind of explanation and defense of Heidegger's contra-logical philosophizing. But that explanation will be radically different from the kind of rational appeals that Priest offers on behalf of his paraconsistent logic as formal system. As a first step toward understanding the differences between Priest and Heidegger, let's consider how they come to challenge traditional logics as formal system. Priest's motivation for advocating paraconsistent logics originates within logic as a discipline of formalization. Classical formal systems allow for paradoxes, and Priest advances dialethisms as the most reasonable way of resolving them. By contrast, Heidegger's challenge to the principle of non-contradiction is motivated by his substantive claims in the arena of logic as metaphysical inquiry. Heidegger does not go hunting up paradoxes, but rather has a paradox thrust upon him in the form of theses 1 to 3 above and related claims about truth, Dasein, and the nature of philosophy. This difference in the origins of their projects has consequences for the sort of inquiry they pursue. And for the canons of rationality to which they may appeal. Priest treats logical theorizing as a kind of scientific investigation of a realm of entities. Because he thinks of his investigation as a science, he draws on the sciences for the canons of rationality that govern it. His goal is to find the optimal fit of theory to evidence, where optimality of fit is to be assessed by appeal to the theoretical virtues appropriate to any science. So it's still a lot to go here, but I think you understand by now how radical Heidegger's and Priest's ideas are. They have never been mentioned before, never been thought of before. That goes for both Priest and Heidegger. It's very important to remember that you will not find this argument somewhere else, at least not until modern age. For me, when I encountered logic, it was called classical logic, and about 2 decades later I learned it was the logic of Frege and Russell, and not even old as that, an invention. And they used, both of them, rationality and inferences from science to sort of justify the classical logic. And it worked. It got accepted. But there is a counter-argument here that Witherspoon is slowly formulating against going to science for a copy of rationality. I feel there is an indication that it should be the other way around. And my senses say that this is the point of Heidegger. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye for now.